Hello, this is Erik Davis. Welcome to Expanding Mind, a new show on the Progressive Radio Network devoted to the intersection of consciousness, technology, and spirituality. And spirituality is kind of a weak word in a way, sort of wan, a bit of a limp noodle, and yet it's the best thing we have to describe this continuous need that people have to push the boundaries of their souls, of their experience, to face the mysteries and to try to figure out what's going on. The approach that I'm taking here is that spirituality's got to be real deal to face the world that we're in today. It's obviously not about fairy tales. It's not about hiding from the reality of the difficulties we face and the conundrum of being a human being in a late capitalist meltdown society. But at the same time, it never goes away because there's something in us that's pushing forever forward, and that it's in marrying that quest with more technical understandings of consciousness and more scientific ways of approaching the brain, of neurology, of evolution, that we begin to get this dialectic of the human spirit where we're moving between skepticism and faith, moving between practices and critique. And we open up a sort of different way of approaching spirituality than I think it has in the past, one less based on belief and one more open to the conundrum of consciousness, the thing that we face every moment of our day, and how do we deal with the continuing unfolding nature of mind. A few years ago, I did this interesting thought experiment where I was sitting there going, well, I'm really interested, I've always been interested in different occult systems and different spiritual paths and practices as kind of an anthropologist and a participant as well in many ways, but not really a believer, not really a joiner. And I was looking at my past and saying, but what are those things that I do that there's just no way I could confront a skeptic with? What are those things that I have invested in, have had experiences in, that I just cannot accept a purely materialist or mechanistic explanation for, as I'm willing to take on for most spiritual phenomena? And I had to acknowledge what divination systems, and particularly the ancient Chinese oracle of the I Ching, which I started using when I was a kid growing up in Southern California at the tail end of the spiritual counterculture in the late 70s and early 80s. And a friend turned me on to this remarkable divination tool, and it's been part of my life ever since. And however skeptical I may be about the true nature of reality, however much I may believe that the mind can project its fantasies and its fears and create stories about what happens, I cannot believe that the responses from this remarkable divination tool are, quote-unquote, mere chance. Of course, what mere chance is a bit of a conundrum. To help me work out that, I'd like to bring on my co-host, Maja Dao. Maja is an esoteric librarian in Los Angeles, and she'll be helping me out with some data that she draws from her vast stores of lore. And Maja, I understand that you're actually particularly keen on the topic of the I Ching as well.
Hi, Erik. Yeah, I totally am. I'm super into the I Ching, too. And like you, I have this sort of skeptical nature about lots of things, and I have a background in science as well. So I like to, really look at a lot of these occult systems and things like that. And I, much like you, with the I Ching, have come to experiences that I just can't lay down to mere chance or, something that could be explainable. It just gets really freaky-deaky, and I think it's a really good thing to start with when we're dealing with spirituality, technology, and consciousness, like you said, because the I Ching really falls into all of those categories. The I Ching is touted as one of the oldest books in the world that's existent, and they found turtle shells that had been used to do I Ching dating back to 6500 BC.
Yeah, that's amazing. And one of the things about it that I think is really key in terms of this question of technology is the way I approach the book is I don't really worry about what could possibly be making some answer that is more reasonable than mere chance. I look at it as a kind of communications device. I mean, it's an ancient book, but it's an ancient interactive book.
Yeah.
And there's something about setting up a situation where you create a system that allows you to interact with the universe, with the world of chance, if you want to think about it that way, or with the world of deep pattern. And by doing it a certain way, very interesting and rich messages will arise, even if you don't really believe in anything. Just the experience, the practice of engaging this very interesting kind of media, really, can produce a lot of fascinating effects.
Yeah, and what's crazy is that it's all binary codes. It's all ones and zeros. And, in fact, there is some evidence that might show that Leibniz actually developed the binary number system, which is where we get most of our technology, right? I mean, all computer programming and everything like that could actually be based on the I Ching, because he learned the binary number sequence from this Jesuit priest that had just gotten back from China and had learned the I Ching. So it's very tied into technology that way, and it exhibits its own consciousness. Like you said, you have these experiences with the I Ching where you get that access to the universe, and literally, like, I've had readings with it where it's exhibiting its own consciousness. Like, it'll kind of mess with you or just show that it's consciously aware that you're using it, you know?
Yeah, it's one of, and as I said, in my experience, it's one of the devices that's the most rich in terms of having a kind of character. Because it's a fascinating thing, and a lot of the ways in which we try to reach beyond our rationality or reach beyond our merely human world and to connect with deeper patterns and forces in the cosmos, a lot of the time what we're doing is setting up a kind of interactive possibility where something on the outside is allowed to begin to have the feel of a character or of a personality. It's the way we meet characters in our dreams. You can meet a fabulous golden dragon who laughs at you in your dream, and it really strikes you. Now, maybe that's a part of your psyche, but in the experience of it, it's an I-thou relationship. It's an interactive relationship. And with the I Ching, in my experience, you definitely get not only a rich answers, but a sense of a particular kind of personality or character.
Absolutely. It's like have a dialogue with something other than yourself.
Well, to deepen this dialogue, I want to bring on our guest for today. Steven Karcher has been studying the I Ching and other divination systems for decades. Has written many books on it. My favorite being the Total I Ching, which came out relatively recently, which is at once an extremely useful and a novel translation and sort of poetic elaboration of the core divination text of the I Ching, but also really introduces a new twist on this very complex, multi-level book. So to get more into the nitty-gritty of the thing, I'd like to welcome Steven Karcher.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to
Steven.
Expanding Mind.
Happy to be here.
So I wanted to start with just a personal story about when you first became interested in divination systems, or when you first discovered the I Ching, and where you were in your life when that happened and how it spoke to you.
Well, actually, it was long ago. It was in 1969 when I had moved to Vancouver, British Columbia, and I had a dream about I was walking down a street, and there was a long ochre-colored building over on the right-hand side, and I walked into the building, and it was all full of books, and one of the books said, "Take me." And the next morning, I was walking down a street in Kitsilano, and I said, my, this looks quite familiar. And sure enough, there was this building over there, Banyan Books, and I walked in, and as I walked down the aisles, this book, literally, it felt like it grabbed me by the hair or whatever and said, "Take me home with you." And I then proceeded to take it home to my little basement suite and spend 4 or 5 days doing divinations. And at the end of that time, I had loaded all the symbols up. They really load into your imagination, reshape what the Chinese would call your heart mind. And the very first question that I asked to it is, "Who are you, and how may I use you?" And the answer was hexagram 50, Ding, the cauldron or the sacred vessel, which is a paradigm for the creation of a new spiritual cosmos, or a new relation to the cosmos, and that we are in the ding, cooking, and that's been my experience with it ever since.
And that's also an interesting hexagram, because it's one of the few that is a object of human craft. Most of the images are thoroughly based in natural images, and I think that's very, very powerful. But I just want to step back just a bit for our audience, people who are not that familiar with the I Ching. It's always struck me as kind of interesting that if you're sort of loosely involved and kind of interested in certain occult or divination things, you're inevitably going to know something about astrology. You're inevitably going to be exposed to the tarot and have some sense of that symbology. But it's the penetration of the I Ching in sort of the West it has a different kind of quality in my experience, in that some people discover it and it becomes a lifelong passion for them, but it doesn't quite sort of stand in the place that things like the tarot or astrology do. So I'd love it if you could just give a little bit of an overview of the nature of the system in terms of people asking questions or engaging it.
Well, I usually say the Yi is a book, a technique, and a Tao, a way or spiritual practice. And as a book, it's composed of 64 six-line figures called hexagrams, like this flickering binary code. And these hexagrams have old omen words and magical phrases loaded onto them. And the hexagrams themselves form this enormous matrix that is really, to my mind, sort of I call it a process duplicate of a chaos system. And then the ancient sages, whoever or whatever they are, placed these words at strategic places in the matrix. And as the hexagrams passed through Chinese history, they collected meanings. It's like a great river of symbols flowing down through history. But you don't. It's a book, but you don't read it in a normal sense, in a narrative sense. You access this through this thing that Jung called synchronicity, quote unquote chance. So that when you will make a hexagram through throwing 3 coins or picking tokens out of a bowl, several different methods, all of which are meaningless in terms of the positivistic system, in terms of the cause and effect universe. So what this random thing does is it affects sort of a rupture in time, and it opens us. It opens that interactive space so that we are now talking directly to something other than ourselves, and the individual is always a part of the equation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you see, when you do this method, you throw your coins or whatever, and a hexagram comes up. And, of course, in that moment, the entire matrix reconfigures itself and right in relation to you in a particular moment in time. So there's the book can't be read objectively, and this is the technique. It can't be read objectively. You don't read it from beginning to end. You read it in the way that it wants to be read by you.
Yeah, it always struck me as one of the remarkable things about it is just we're so interested in interactivity these days, and people are talking about what the future of the book is, and we're seeing, the emergence of the Kindle and the electronic readers of books, and one of the main things that they tout is the ability to sort of literally interact with the book more, with being able to notate it or to search it in different ways. And already the way that we can interact with texts that are online is very different, where you can go to a site that has, all of Schopenhauer or the Bible, and you can do word searches almost as a way, almost like an oracular kind of reading. In fact, that used to happen, as I'm sure you know. There was a divination a way of doing divination in the ancient Western world, in Roman times particularly, and later in Christian era, of doing the sortes, where you would randomly open the book of the Bible or Virgil, and the first line that would come to you was an oracular message. So it's interesting to me that just at this point when our ideas about the book are changing technologically, that we can look back and see other ways of reading books, or different kinds of books that are open-ended and interactive and hyperdimensional from the get-go, because that matrix you're talking about there with the I Ching is really a sort of hyperdimensional relationship of all of these ones and zeros in a very proto-computer-like way.
It's like those choose-your-own-adventure books.
Like what?
You remember those choose-your-own-adventure books that they had? Did you ever read those?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Except the adventure is your life. Talk a little bit more about chance, Steven. I'm really interested in that, because it seems to me that even if you don't believe in synchronicity, even if you don't have an idea that that our idea of chance, or the positivist idea of chance, is kind of an illusion or a projection of our own unwillingness to recognize deep pattern, that even then, even chance itself, as a mystery or as an unknown, can serve as a passageway to that deeper conversation.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. Two things. One, there is no word for what we call, chance, coincidence in Chinese. It's usually translated as either spontaneity or the speech of a spirit, the intervention of a spirit in your life. But see, I believe that the Yi is very at home in what we're calling virtual reality, and I also feel that using it, or using any divination system, is not a matter of belief. You don't have to believe anything. All you have to do is entertain the symbols or images that come up, and a meaningful interaction occurs. You don't have to believe it.
Yeah, to me that's a key point. And that's one of the main things that I think a lot of people on both sides of the equation miss when dealing with a lot of spiritual practices and occult systems in general. People who are either on the one hand clinging to kind of a supernatural belief system that supports them and makes them feel better, which is okay. And then on the other hand, people who are so skeptical that they're unwilling to just practice the way that when you go to a theater performance, you don't sit there and go, oh, these are a bunch of actors getting paid to mouth words that some guy wrote on a computer. Instead, you let yourself go into the experience, meanings arise, emotions arise, maybe new perspectives on your life arise, and the same kind of thing does apply very much to a whole variety of spiritual practices and occult systems as well. And it's part of the fun of them, in a way, is to see what happens when you walk through the door without adding on overlays of excessive belief.
Yeah, I believe, or I feel, or I've experienced that one of the purposes of something like the I Ching is to fracture your belief systems, to open them to something else. And another motif that would come in here is, in the evolution of the religions of the world, there occurred a sort of axial age, both in the Hellenistic Mediterranean and in China, which we might basically call the shift from polytheism to monotheism.
Mm-hmm.
The shift from a multi-centered cosmos to a single-centered cosmos. And using divination was so central to the pre-Christian world. It's so central in traditional cultures, non-monotheistic cultures, because it provides an experience of whatever spirit is, rather than a belief about it. And that was fairly studiously controlled in several world cultures.
Controlled meaning that where once it was pervasive, it becomes more and more a matter of specific statecraft or things that people control.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the ways I think about the power of divination is really just what does it mean to read, and not read in the way that we think of as just processing information, but actually read in the sense of the way you read a poem, or the way that if you're tracking animals through the forest, the way that you read tracks on the ground. And you can imagine this, our Paleolithic forebears completely and utterly immersed in nature. No concept of a difference or a distinction between human spaces and natural spaces. Everything is this enormous, blooming, threatening, divine, delicious world. And that within that, how do you relate? How do you act? Well, whether or not you're thinking rationally in terms of tracking the animal and how you're going to hunt it, or you're thinking in terms of these deeper sacred patterns that underline human life, what are you going to do? You're going to read signs. You're going to learn to read, whether it's the birds flying through the air. Does that mean it's a certain time of the year, or does the actual shape that they form in the sky indicate something? These two kinds of reading, sort of rational and more poetic, are deeply woven together. And I feel like one of the remarkable things about the I Ching in particular, in comparison even with other divination systems that I've experienced, is that it seems to offer a kind of channel back to a very, very old, or at least very unusual way of experiencing this balance of a very coherent, rational system in terms of the mathematics of it and the patterning of it and the complexity of the numerology, and at the same time this poetic landscape of natural forces that really have an extraordinary amount of power.
Well, and then for us, this is the technique. Every time we throw the coins, every time we enter the book in a synchronistic rather than a linear way, the old Chinese would say we accumulate a little of this thing called day, realizing power. It accumulates in the heart. And this is the way, or the practice. And over time, it transforms the way we experience the world.
Well, how would you characterize this quality a little bit more?
Day, actualizing Tao. Tao De Jing. It's one of the basic idea or experience or whatever in Eastern thought, to my mind, is Tao. The way. It's the wordless secret, just the way, the basic psychophysical energy that underlies everything. And it's essentially wordless. But by using the oracle to constantly reconnect yourself to this way, one accumulates, within the individual, one accumulates the power to become who you're meant to be. In other words, the Tao manifests in and through you as an individual.
So would you say it's kind of tied into destiny then also, like through using the I Ching, it kind of helps you realize destiny?
Oh, yes. Yeah, most definitely, most definitely. In fact, one of the big terms in the Yi is the Junsu, or what Wilhelm translated as the superior man, and I translate as the realizing person. And the realizing person is attempting to act in accord with the way, and in doing so, to realize their own destiny. The bright omen that heaven gave them when they came into this world, and that it's our job to manifest. Now, the oracle is a powerful tool in doing this.
It also helps kind of create the idea that such realization is possible. I mean, meaning that even if in some ways the ultimate meaning or destiny of our lives is something that we create or we imagine, that it's not written in the stars or written in our DNA, that by creating an environment, this sort of interactive environment of relating to these symbols, that you build up the possibility of being able to have and to project and to feel your way into such a destiny. So it's a very engaged process, and it really underlies the role of practice, of just the actual act of engaging rather than conceptualization or just following the symbols intellectually.
Yeah, most definitely. That's why I always say you don't have to believe anything. You experience something. And
a question I had for you also is that, if let's take the classic edition of the I Ching that, all the Bohemians and first started using in the 1950s and early 60s, which was the Wilhelm Baines translation, and which is sort of like the classic for the English-speaking West. And when you read that book, it's clear that there are these different layers of commentary or almost different eras, like geological strata. There's these Confucian layers. There's these layers of later commentary. And I know that it must be the case that when you come to translating the I Ching now, it's almost like what are these different layers, and what point for you was important to bring forward in contrast to this more traditional kind of Confucian approach?
Yeah, well, the Confucian philosophy and the Chinese language both were established in the Han Dynasty about 200 BC to 200 AD, and at that time they edited out a whole set of meanings in the words, rearranged the hexagrams to turn the Yi into what's essentially a moral social philosophy. Now, and that's what Wilhelm translated. He was a great translator, but what he didn't have accessible to him is what we do have now, which is the archaeological discoveries that's come out of the tombs and the reconstruction of early Old Chinese. So my job was to go back behind the philosophy and just activate the world of myth and ritual that lies behind those concepts. So the images that lie behind the ideas. And so that people, when they use the oracle, can experience that. And the particular Confucian interpretation, you can use it if you want to, but it isn't, I would say, imbricated, woven into the text.
Would it be fair to characterize? How would you characterize that older strata? I mean, you could use the word Taoist, you could use the word shamanic. How would you characterize that more sort of lively, forceful zone?
Well, it's sort of at the earliest traditions of the Yi gave birth to almost all of Eastern culture, including Taoism. But yes, particularly post-Confucian, I'd characterize it as Taoist.
And I think
emphasizes
also
a much more spontaneous and less conceptual approach to the world, and sees it not in moral philosophical terms, but in, I suppose, what we might call magical terms. It's a magical world.
And if you look at Steven's book in Total I Ching, it's totally different than the Confucian ones, because Steven looks at two hexagrams in a reading. They have a pair. So it's like a yin and yang thing, which in the old system that Steven discovered is that they needed to be put together and not looked at individually. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, Steven.
Well, most of both the Confucians in China and the Imperial Church in the Hellenistic Mediterranean essentially split the world. They split the pairs of things. Before that, you might have yin and yang, and those are fairly late words, but they're not moral, and they're in constant interaction, just like the two hexagrams of a pair were in constant interaction. One of the things I realized was, you have this hexagram, say hexagram number 3, sprouting. You turn it upside down, and it becomes 4. And this characterizes the whole 64. So originally, there weren't 64 hexagrams, there were 32 pairs. And that's the way the old sage mind thought.
I just wanted to come in here and announce once again that you're listening to Expanding Mind with host Erik Davis and Maja Dao, and we're talking to Dr. Steven Karcher, who is an authority on the I Ching, and we'll be taking questions in a moment, and the number to call in for those is 873-4643. Steven, I also wanted to talk a little bit about sacrifice. In your translation, or in the Total I Ching, you talk a lot about sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, as a modern Westerner, that's a kind of hard concept to get into. It's such an integral part of that ancient worldview, and yet it's a little bit hard to know exactly what does it mean. How does sacrifice function in the magical worldview that you're laying out in terms of the I Ching? But more importantly, how does it relate to our experiences today and the kinds of things that we face?
Well, yeah, this is the old world was the oldest part of the old world was definitely characterized by animal sacrifice. But as things moved down in China in the Warring States period and such, people began to realize that and this was to feed the spirits. They realized that the food of the spirits is not necessarily the literal animal, but the image. So, to my mind, when I say make a sacrifice and you will succeed, that means offer your imagination, your attention, and your devotion to this, and they will send their blessings in return.
I think that's one of a really hard thing for a lot of Westerners to get in touch with, even if they're seekers, even if they're really looking to, step outside the constraints of modernity and connect with a deeper sense of tradition, is this feeling of a genuine offering, of what one gives away, of what one kind of sacrifices. Even though in our lives we're called upon to make sacrifices all the time, to make our loved ones happy, to make proper ethical decisions. We make sort of sacrifices all the time, but in my experience, it's often hard for people to recognize the way in which they are already part of what you could call a sacrificial economy. Yeah. And yet it seems to be a key element of entering into that deeper sense of reciprocity with the universe.
Yes. On the basic level, to me, sacrifice is a habit of mind that will, rather than acting directly and compulsively on a drive, will refer it back and ask the world of the spirits or the symbols what it sees, what it wants, and then adjust the drive, turn the literal drive into imagination.
And it's funny because that actually lets you see reality more clearly.
Yeah.
Through your imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. And this habit of mind fractures that ego drive to achievement that is eating up the world. It breaks into it. It fractures it. And that's the spiritual practice, to me, involved in sacrifice and in the great divination systems. In a certain kind of way, cum grano salis, it's like, thy will, not mine, be done. Mm-hmm. I want to do this.
Well, I love your emphasis on fracture as well, because I think sometimes we approach these things as if there's just this sort of smooth, healing continuity of engagement, whereas it strikes me that some of the more productive and powerful engagements with divination systems or other practices, there is this very strong sense of a rupture, because you have to actually break down or have your normal conceptions of things kind of interrupted. So for me, that is actually figured in the process of consulting the I Ching, that for me, I don't really worry about synchronicity, whether it exists, whether it doesn't exist, how you think about it in terms of quantum physics or whatever, all interesting things to think about. But for me, much more important is that quote-unquote chance, the idea of chance, the submission to randomness, is itself a gesture towards that kind of rupture, towards breaking my control.
Mm-hmm. Well, Aristotle once said something in terms of, he was talking about the Eleusinian mysteries, and Kerr used it to characterize the quote-unquote mystery religions. And he said their purpose is not to learn something, but to experience something and be set right.
Yeah, and I think it's that allowing ourselves into the doorway of those kinds of experiences, I think, is one of the stronger pulls of a lot of spiritual possibility, and that it really is about allowing a sort of theater, if you think about it this way, again, in less dogmatic terms, a kind of theater of possibility where encounters can happen, and in transformative encounters, ones that are, pieces of music or plays that are so moving that it sort of marks you in a way. And those are essentially experiences rather than discoveries about the structure of reality or even dogmatic prescriptions of what I should do next. But I have a personal question for you, which is that I know that I have gone through periods in my life where I was obsessively and compulsively using this the Oracle. It's much mellower over the last few years. I find that I need fewer questions and I can contemplate more with the few hexagrams that I get. But I'm just wondering, for you personally, how your day-to-day relationship with the Oracle has changed.
Oh, it has varied, most certainly, depending on what's going on in my life. Oh, and it's a fairly standard thing. At some point, if you're called by the I Ching, and say, I want you, you will go through this period of just posing question after question after question after question. And this is the process of loading the symbols up into your heart mind, which is qualitatively different from what we call oracle obsession or oracle addiction.
How's the difference?
Well, it's an active engagement. It isn't just searching for the answer you want, and it isn't just trying to find something that can make decisions for you. It's a real engagement. I remember me, in times of great transition, I'll talk to it all the time about very small things. Because in those times when the ghost river is flowing, when everything around that you normally depend on melts, the Yi and other systems are designed to help you navigate those times without grabbing at other structures too soon. So it becomes a guide to the passage to what the old Chinese would call the ghost river. And that really is one of the things that makes me feel this. It's very, very important for us because our time, without a doubt, the Ghost River is flowing all around us.
And what's the Ghost River? Could you elaborate that a bit?
Well, technically, it's the trigram Kan, rushing water. It's in the old mythological world. It's the dark river of souls, rushing river of souls that lies underneath the earth. The earth floats on it. And at certain times it rises and dissolves everything.
And we're
medically,
medically a rising.
Oh yeah, we're in the middle of the Ghost River.
I think there's a lot of death metal songs about that.
And the Yi, I feel the Yi is probably the most sophisticated and complex, textured divination system we have. And because you don't have to believe anything to use it, it can hook up with any system of beliefs you have or use and move them around. But its purpose in late antiquity, its purpose was to help us through the times of trouble. When there's destabilizing change all around us, how can we survive this without turning it into yet another fixation or institution? How do we, the Yi inculcates imaginative mobility.
That's
flexibility and mobility.
Imaginative mobility.
Yeah.
Well, what I would like to do now is I want to go to our every episode we'll be listening to a brain drop, a little song, a little spirit message from the musical world. And then when we come back from that tune, I'm going to open it up for questions. Once again, the number at the Progressive Radio Network is 888-873-4643, and we're talking with Dr. Steven Karcher. The tune I pulled out today is from a Brazilian instrumental group called Wakchi, and they build their own instruments, and they made a record called the I Ching, in which they have short little ditties for each of the 8 trigrams, which are the basic symbolic layer of the 64 hexagrams, and they're each associated with different aspects of nature. And the one that we're going to hear today is Earth. So here's Earth from Wakchi. That was Wakchi with their little I Ching trigram tune, Earth. And now for the remainder of this edition of Expanding Mind, we'll turn it over to callers calling in to 888-873-4643 if there are any people with questions. And if not, we'll just continue chatting with Steven Karcher. Are there questions out there?
Anyone?
Do you have a question, Maja?
I always have lots of questions. I would like to take this moment to just let Steven, if you would like to tell folks what your website is, if they're interested, and maybe you can get, Steven does give consultations, and he can do a divination for you. And he was also, initiated as a shaman in South Africa, so he does really, I think, really good consultations. Steven, do you want to just mention your website where people can get a hold of you?
Well, yeah, there are actually two. The developed one is greatvessel.com, which was designed as a study and resource base for the study of the I Ching, particularly in this mythic manner, and also technological, because along with reviving the myths and rituals and everything, I found that had to reinvent what I call the tools to reflect this, the fact that the hexagrams exist in pairs.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a vast amount of the resources there. There are example readings, and there's a really excellent software consultation program. The other website that I'm just involved with now is Institute for Cultural Change, and we're in Ojai, and we're setting up a series of workshops and consultations and such, revolving around, well, my metaphor for it is return to the well, return to the source of water that all can draw on in a time of the oppression of the thought demons, the prisons of the mind, the prisons of the mind. And that is the pair 47 and 48.
I'm curious whether you have had in your readings, looking at the larger kind of world picture, a strong sense of what message you're getting, if you will, from this ancient oracle on what's happening. What's the underlying pattern of all these changes that we can look at? You know, so many of them seemingly catastrophic, many of them seemingly unsolvable, and yet there are these, you know, tendencies of hope and productivity and new opportunities. You know, it's so hard to get a sense of how to approach or even how to feel about the nature of the transformations that we're in. Do you have a strong sense of a kind of underlying pattern or message?
Well, overall, the things that have come up when... and by the way, this is something I'm very interested in, using the yi to talk about larger-than-personal issues. But the hexagrams that come up again and again and again are in this sequence. Numerically, they're 47, 48, 49, and 50. And 47 portrays us as caught in the prisons of the mind in a really rather obsessive and warlike culture. And 48 portrays this source of water that all can draw on. The well is the most basic social unit of life in the East. So the two of those, to my mind, show the necessity of dropping out of the over-elaborated institutions, returning to this common water. And out of that, hexagram 49, revolution, the melting of the metals. It really is very much an old alchemical, shamanistic, whatever. So all of the forms of the culture are melted and then poured into a new spiritual paradigm, into the mold of a new spiritual paradigm, the casting of a ding, a sacred bronze vessel, which is a new paradigm, in the deepest sense of the word, that can reconnect us, that can reconnect heaven and earth. And the ding was a sacred vessel in which a meal was cooked, but humans, ancestors, and spirits all shared in the meal. And
I think one thing that strikes me really interesting from that, because, you know, we hear a lot about a new paradigm, and it's sort of part of the investment of the imagination and possibilities to imagine this kind of transformation. But what really strikes me about what you're describing there is this interesting role of metals, this interesting kind of alchemy. It's always struck me that one of the remarkable things about the sort of the baseline Chinese imagination of natural forces is that, unlike in the West, where we have these four elements, air, earth, fire, and water, that they recognized early on this kind of propulsive but also analytic and kind of concretizing and crystallizing quality of metals.
Yep.
Metals, which are, on the one hand, you know, as much a part of the earth as fire or water or certainly earth elements themselves, but metals have this kind of transformative potential that gets elaborated by early human cultures, and that one of the first things we do is we start to figure out how to use metals to manifest technology, to manifest machines, to manifest devices that heal and that hurt and that organize, and that in some ways the technology that we're riding at this hyper-abstracted, crazy, threatening period in civilization is this kind of enormous, elaborated expression of metals. of the intelligence of metals, and that there's something about that alchemical transformation that strikes me as particularly relevant.
Yeah, most definitely. And of course, in the medical systems, metals are our concepts, our idea, our conceptual structures, our conceptual scaffoldings. And we, of course, have to have them. But in this time, they're dry. They become sterile and oppressive. So the move is, and this occurs within each individual, the move is to melt those forms. That's in hexagram 49, the shaman circling round and round and round the fire, animal mask, raising the inner heat. And this melts the metals, melts our ideas down so that they become liquid and can be poured into a new shape.
Do you have a sense of what that new shape looks like?
Well, for me, it's the great image is the cauldron, the ding.
And how does that
if you've ever looked at one of these really closely, then they're highly crafted and highly cultured, beautiful things. But if you look at the figures dancing around and through the ding, they're all what I call the dream animals. All the animals of our imagination are dancing again around and across this vessel. So that, to me, says something about ideas that can set the animal powers of the psyche into a dance again.
I'm curious. Could you talk a little bit about this initiation that you had in South Africa, and how that informed your understanding of this sort of animal level of psychic consciousness? Well, I usually introduce myself as a three-legged person, but and which one leg is I'm scholar and intellectual. The other leg is I was a dancer and choreographer for quite a while, and the third leg is the sangoma. And to my mind, whatever shamans or ngangas or sangomas do, they're trying to open a ritual space in which these animals can enter our lives. And I see the animals. One of the projects, very interesting things I found out, taking the classical Chinese words, or the names of hexagrams, back into early Old Chinese, is many of them turned into animals. Like there's the pair 15 and 16. I think Wilhelm this is modesty and enthusiasm. Well, in early Old Chinese, this is the great gray rat and the elephant.
And one of the nice things about
this melting of the metals is the melting of our concepts that allows these animal powers to begin to move again in our imaginations.
That can be pretty frightening. I think
yes, it certainly can be.
It
certainly can
be. There's a heavy element to this shamanic experience that it's not all light and fairies.
Nope. Most
definitely. And I was just
going to
say it's
powerful.
really neat. If you look in Total I Ching, Steven puts the old Chinese characters so you can see the animal pictures and how they would draw the old characters. You see the animals in them. So you can actually look at the old words in his book and you can see them there.
Well, here's a question on top of that. If we just look at the history of the I Ching, from before modern times, we already see this process of what you could call abstraction, or complexification, or even stratification, in the sense that it moves away from this core root of animal, shamanic, natural forces into these layers of philosophy, of social understanding that becomes increasingly abstract. So we can see that process even in the history of the oracle itself. And it strikes me that one of the things about the moment we're at is that process of abstraction has just reached such an alarmingly complex level. And yet, in some ways, it is also part of the flow. It's part of the evolution of things. Because with this book, you can see the evolution or the transformation of those kinds of abstractions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, most definitely. And I don't think ideas are bad. I think ideas are great, but it's like the splitting of the pairs. It's like that moment in Chinese culture when whatever yang is became morally good and gender male, and whatever yin is became morally evil and gender female. In the old world, you still have male and female, but they move back and forth. They're connected. And I think it's the same thing. Something is developed as an idea, and that's all very fine. Then the time comes when it ossifies just a bit too much, and the process of melting it back down begins.
And that's like
as long as we dance with this process, we're fine.
The whole concept of the I Ching is change.
Yep.
That things change and flow into each other, too.
And it's the balancing of these two, the two primal powers. We can call them all sorts of things. I translate them as the dragon and the dark animal goddess. But neither one is right. And there's this saying from Dazhuan, the great treatise, real simple saying, one yin, one yang, that's Tao. 1 foot in the yin, then 1 foot in the yang, then 1 foot in the yin, this balancing, this dance sort of back and forth, that unites the powers. We get in trouble when we split them and then overdevelop one. That can cause a rather violent, what Jung called an enantiodromia, a sudden shift into the opposite that usually does a lot of damage.
Can you imagine that we're sort of doing that on some level, on a civilization-wide
yes,
wide level?
Yes, most definitely. And to my mind, the E or the change helps within each individual heart mind, helps us diffuse the potential violence of that. Jung said anything we will not accept in the imagination, we will most probably confront as fate. So the oracles, to my mind, one of their jobs is to turn what has become overly literalized back into imagination and entertain it there, so we don't have to walk down the street and, be hit over the head by our own shadow.
Yeah, and that brings us around to that idea of reading, that we have, like, in some ways, a very simplistic idea of reading. We read for information, or we read for a literal story. But, of course, there's these other layers that are going on all the time, these poetic layers, these layers of symbols, of allusion. And the better readers we get, even if you're just looking at books, the more we have access to that imaginative dimension. And it seems to me that one of the things that an interactive shamanic book like the I Ching is doing is to encourage us to read our lives in that way as well, where, yes, we're aware of the literal story, where we're still agents, we have to make decisions, we have to do things, but there are these other layers of poetry and of imagination, in a deep sense of the imagination, and that by shifting our reading that way, the whole space opens up and there's a little bit more room to move. Well, I think we've reached the end of it. Steven Karcher, thank you so much for joining Maja and I on the inaugural episode of Expanding Mind.
My pleasure.
It was a great thing. And once again, you can check out Steven's site online at the Institute for Cultural Change and greatvessel.com. And you can look at my website, techgnosis.com, TECHGNOSIS. And next time I want some more callers. This is the Progressive Radio Network. Maja, any last comments there?
Thanks for the great show, you guys. It was really nice. I liked it.
All right. See you out there next week.